But for those of you who are new here, there are a couple of things that I just want to quickly remind you about the mini challenge, which is specifically for ZoomCharts. You can sign up for this in our website. You can download the data set here. And most importantly, one of the things that you can get through here is the developer's license. The developer's license is an account we create from our side for you, which allows you to use all of our visuals with full access, right? So you don't have to worry about any features being restricted or anything like that. Anything that the visuals can do, you're going to be able to achieve as well. So that's one important thing. As far as this developer's license goes, you can see for me it says see my license. For you, if it's going to be the first time, it's going to be get my license or sign up for license, something like that, right? But once you do this, this is the most important part. This, like I said, is a specific email account that we create for you. So whenever you're working on the challenge report, make sure that you use this account for the Power BI desktop, right? Because this account is the one that is licensed. This is the account that allows you to use those visuals without any licensing restrictions. Second thing, when you get the initial account, you're going to see a password. I can show you my password as well because it's not valid anymore. So the initial password that you see here is only for the initial sign up. So when you're going to have your first sign in, you're going to be prompted to change this password. And this is not going to be updated on this field. So write down that password or just remember it. The reason for this is additional security layer, right? So it's not saved in our databases anywhere. What's your password and so forth. So this has to be changed as well. So if you forget about your password or just cannot remember it, again, reach out to the team. We're going to be able to help you out with that, and you're going to be able to log in again. But the most important part is this is the account that you use whilst developing the challenge report. If you have already all ZoomCharts licenses, of course you can use your own accounts, so that's all good. But if not, this is the one that allows you to use the full version of the visuals. Now, what else? When you sign up for the challenge, if this is your first time even creating a report, right, the direction is very important. Okay, what am I supposed to do? Where do I begin? What am I supposed to answer with the visuals and so forth, right? So the one way and how we always structure these challenges is we give you a little brief. The brief is a description of the data set. It also covers some questions to explore. And we also added this little note because it seems like it was very necessary because people wanted to answer all of them. These questions are essentially just you don't have to cover all of them. You can cover one or two, or you can cover completely different things that are not even mentioned here, right? So this is just an idea on what to focus on if you don't have any direction. If you look at the data set and you notice something that, hey, this could be an interesting sort of dimension to look into, you're more than welcome to explore that. The data set that you get here, remember, that is the base data set. If you also see any additional dimensions that, if I add, for example, let's say, I don't know, the time of the year or the phase of the moon based on which the subscriptions were created or something like that, go for it. There's no limitations to the data set in that sense. You can enhance it, you can remove columns that are not necessary. You do what you want with it. Everyone just starts off with the same one, but the way and how you tackle this depends on what you want to do with it, right? A very simple explanation or example with this would be, let's say, if you're just focusing on the number of memberships and let's say the total revenue coming in from them, everything else that doesn't support that ideology, you can completely remove from the data set. Any additional columns, anything, they also have an impact on performance, right? So why have something in the data set that you're not going to be using, right? So cleaning, transforming, all of that is going to be done by you based on the necessity. So this is one place where I usually recommend to quickly take a look into. And of course, if this is your first time participating, make sure to also go through the judging criteria. So you can see also what are the things that we're going to be looking into. And of course, pay attention to the technical requirements, right? To make sure that it's just valid and we can actually validate the report. Now, one last thing before we move on to the data set is do not forget that one of the ways in how we structure this is we allow you to submit the report multiple times, right? So what this means is if you are creating a report, let's say you get to some sort of a middle point, you're feeling okay with the report, but you just want to get our feedback on it. So one of the things that you can do is you can submit the report right here. You can also, of course, in the description write, for example, some of the things that you would love to see our input on. And our team is going to be going through those and sending you that feedback, right? And we're going to give you some comments, we're going to give you some directions. So by submitting the initial time, you essentially can get some feedback on the report. And then based on that feedback, you can also enhance it even more, right? So there's no limitation on how many times you can resubmit it. The one thing that I usually encourage people not to do, but it's just our nature, we're still going to be doing this, is not to submit at the very last moment. Because what this means is if there's a lot of submissions coming in, let's say in the last half an hour, it's just not physically possible for us to go through the reports, give the feedback so you have enough time to, fix something or anything like that. So the sooner you send it in, the higher chance you're going to have feedback and you have time to do the changes. The closer you are to the deadline, well, the more difficult it becomes, right? It's just logical, but our nature is to do everything at the last moment. What else? If you're lacking some inspiration on how to create the visuals, how to create the design of something, do not forget that you also have the report examples that you can look into. And every single challenge that has happened before, if you go here to the challenge section, scroll down a bit, there's a full archive of all the challenges that have happened before. So, for example, if we open up the July 2025 challenge, you're going to see right here the winning report, and you can also see all the other submissions, right? You can also see who's the author of the report. If you go here, you can open up their LinkedIn profile and just reach out to them. If there's any particular question or something that you noticed, oh, that's a really cool implementation, I wonder how he or she did it, you can reach out to them, right? Usually, what I say about reaching out to people is what's going to be the worst case scenario? You're not going to get a reply. Well, you're basically exactly in the same position as you were before. You're not losing anything from it. But it might turn out that it's a great opportunity to create some connections. So always use that. All right, so for the challenge itself, let's open up Power BI and let's open up Power Query for this initially. By the way, how's the sound? All good? Yeah, one thing that I forgot to check in the very beginning. But yeah, if somebody could just comment if the sound's okay, just to make sure that all is good. All right, so for the data itself. So whenever you have a data set, one of the first things that I usually do, and I've told this a couple of times already, is I usually try to kind of skim through it, right? I want to understand what's available, what sort of data I have within, how many dimensions I have, how much depth does the report have? Is it very sort of like, a sort of like a 2D, or there's like a more of a 3D approach with drill down levels, a lot of depth to it, or is it just a very static report that's going to be coming out of all of this? So by going through this, we can see that there's actually a lot of different dimensions in this one. And looking at the data, there's actually a lot of things that you can do with it as well. So for example, we have the age, membership types, and of course, do not forget about sort of these qualification criteria as well. So for example, if you go to view, there's two things that I usually recommend to enable. First is column profile. Column profile allows you to get this part. So you can see, for example, distribution of the values, see the min max values and so forth, just kind of give an overall idea of the sample. And the other one is column quality. Column quality are these three identifiers, which help you understand whether the data is valid, if it throws out an error, or if it's just an empty. If you see that, for example, let's say 90% of the column is empty and it's not giving you any significant value, get rid of it, right? So this is the part where you just go through things and figure out, okay, what am I keeping? What am I getting rid of? So that's the first thing. Regarding the columns, we can see there's a lot of different things. And then there's, for example, something like this. You have one particular column that tells you which days of the week is the membership being activated or used, essentially, right? Which days of the week is the member coming in? So one of the things that I would recommend you to think about when you're using this is think about it as an additional dimension that you can expand on. Now, what I mean by this, you could theoretically just throw this into a slicer, right? And you can see already there's different variations of values, and I could use and play around with those. But that's not going to be user friendly. because any unique combination is going to be a new selection, right? So if somebody, for example, you can see it's also not necessarily in the same order. So if somebody had Saturday and Thursday, and somebody had Thursday and Saturday, based on how the data was entered, those are two different variables. So one of the things that I would recommend is find a way on how to split this column, or not even by splitting, just how to transpose the column essentially. So you can get all those unique values. So essentially for each instance, you have, for each membership, you see multiple values. So you can see, okay, so this membership is being used on Saturdays and Thursdays. Now, the reason why I want you to do this, because think about it from the report perspective. Once you go into the report, you might want to have, for example, a dimension and see, okay, which days of the week has the highest attendance. If you're not using this column, it's pretty much impossible right now. But if you start to use this, you can use these different days in combination with, for example, the membership count or customer count, call it whatever you want. You can see, okay, which days has the highest attendance. Once you have that, you can enhance it even further. You can see we have the average check-in time and average checkout time. The reason for the average is just so you have some sort of a baseline, right? So by doing this, by combining the days with the time, you can essentially create a chart that allows you to see, okay, on a timeline, if I look at a daily scale, which days of the week are the highest ones or the main points of possible, let's say, delays or just too many people trying to attend at the same time, and what times of the day. So those are already two different dimensions that you can look into. So when it comes to, for example, special deals or defining which ones are your high demand hours or low demand hours, this is what you would try to understand, right? So combining these two and splitting would be something that you can definitely look into. Then we also have a lot of these classification columns. I call them like that. So something like, for example, attending group lessons where you just have a true or false, right? The same goes for, if you go a little bit further, we also have a few others. So has drink subscription, that's not alcoholic beverages, right? This is where juices, water, and so forth. But drink subscriptions, personal trainings, user sauna, whether it's a group session, whether it's an individual session, and so forth. So there's a lot of these different variables that allow you to define the type of the session. And all of those could be used as a verification process. So when you come into the report, you say, okay, I want to look at all the subscriptions that have, drinking privileges, that have the personal trainer enabled, and the ones that are not using sauna or something like that, right? So those are the main classification ones. Then we have a gender column, subscription price. For the prices, there's a couple of columns covering this, and this is another sort of aspect that you need to take into consideration when you're developing the report. So you can see we have a subscription price. We have the model. So there is monthly, quarterly, and annual, early bird annual. We have adjusted price. So depending whether or not there was some sort of a discount, if there was a discount, what sort of discount was it was, whether it's a promotion, whether it's a specific a group of attendees, how much the discount was, what's the adjusted price, and so forth. So there are a lot of different variables taken into account. But the one thing that hasn't been taken into account, and this is something that you have to do from your side, is right here, the subscription model. The reason why this is so important is because think about it like this, right? If we're just looking at one row of the data. So for example, let's take the first one, right? So subscription price, there has been some adjustment. The final price is 47.5 euros, dollars, whatever it is. But the type is monthly, meaning that if I wanted to figure out how much money have I already collected and how much is still in the pipeline, this is something that I would have to multiply. If it's a monthly, then the maximum I can get from it is this times 12, or depending on when the subscription was started and so forth. But this is something you have to take into consideration, right? Monthly most likely is like times 12, quarterly is times 4 because there's 4 quarters, annual there's just a single payment. So whenever you're going for the total revenue, you cannot just simply sum up the final price. That's going to be incorrect. Based on the subscription model, those total numbers are going to be different. So that's one thing. What else? Access hours. That's something you can take into account as well. I think I quickly skimmed through this part, and what I would say about this one is you can use this if you want to create something that would allow you to look into, for example, whether these memberships are being used correctly or incorrectly. Because you can find, for example, people who have access hours on weekdays only, but they only are attending on weekends, right? So just to kind of figure out, okay, maybe there needs to be some licensing adjustment or subscription adjustment. So maybe this is a category of users we need to reach out to, and so forth. So just take all that into consideration. Location. So we have the location itself plus the longitude and latitude. Join date. Personal training hours, if we have those, multiple locations, if it has access to last visit. And one thing that I did add straight away was an index column. Main reason why I did it is quite simple. If we go through all of this, there is not a single unique identifier of a membership, right? So without that unique identifier, there might be some, let's say, memberships which are actually talking about the same thing or not. I don't know. So if it's not defined in the data set, what I do is I usually just create an index column. The index column is my unique identifier. Every single row is a new number, meaning it's a unique subscription. I think in total we have like 1,980 or something like that. We can actually see the entire data set. 1,998. Very specific number. But hey, it is what it is, right? So now that you've taken all that into consideration, we're going to the report. When we went back to the report, this is kind of something that I started to play around with. And you can already see that there's a lot of different things that you can essentially take into account, right? The customer count, the total revenue, the average age, days since last visit, and so forth. And it all depends on what you want to focus on. Whether you want to focus on the subscription part itself, whether you want to you focus on, for example, which locations have the most active members, which have the least active members, what's the longest period of time that a member hasn't attended a single session. Because every single time, let's say if the subscription is monthly based, right? If a user exceeds 30 days since the last day of visit, there's a higher probability of churning. So there's a higher probability of them leaving and just canceling the subscription. So that might take a toll on your projection, right? So taking all those numbers into consideration, you can play around. The way I look at this report, I haven't done it here for a particular reason, but what I would probably do, and I don't, now again, I'm not saying that everybody has to do it, but I think this data set is very supportive of a case of what if variables, right? So playing around with, for example, how much discount are we applying to things? What happens if monthly user base falls down by 10%? What's going to happen to our revenue and so forth, right? So one of the things that you can definitely play around is what if variables. So that's one of the things. Uh, what else? Field parameters are still going to be very powerful. So in order to create field parameters, make sure that you go to modeling, new parameters and fields. There's a lot of different guides you can look up in YouTube and everything. But the most important thing is when it comes to categorical data, it's quite simple. So if you go here at fields, you can just go to the main data set and, for example, say something like, I want to have a switch between subscription model and membership type. You can just drag them in. That's going to create a new slicer right here, new parameter. And I'm going to use that right here. So parameter 2, I'm going to use that. I remove the value. Go. So once I have this, what I can do is it allows me to switch between two different mechanisms. It's quite simple when you do it with categorical data. It's a lot trickier when you do it with values. Because the first thing that you want to do is do exactly the same, right? Go to modeling, new parameter fields, and just take your values as columns. It's not going to be working because it's not an aggregate value. So what you need to do prior to this, if you also want to create a switch for the values, you need to convert them into a measure. So for example, let's say, I don't know, I had something like a total revenue, and then I have customer count, which I actually then create. I have them right here. And you can see on a value, I'm using series one, in this case, it's total revenue, but it's actually using a parameter as well. So it allows me to just play around and switch. Actually, I haven't, because I just adjusted it parameter. There we go. So you can see I can go from thousands of dollars into just the hundreds of users, right? The main reason why field parameters are very good and why you should always, if you don't know, just learn how to use them, is because one of the most precious resources you have as a report developer is real estate. You don't have a lot of unlimited space. Sure, somebody might argue and say, yeah, but I can just go into the page, go to canvas settings, go for custom, and just with, I don't know, increase to 2000 pixels, right? Sure, you can do that. But at the same time, you have to remember that that report is going to be viewed on different screen sizes. So as soon as you go for something custom, you have to go for an aspect ratio which is recognizable or most commonly used. If you go for random canvas settings, what's going to happen is on different screens, the scaling might happen in very weird sort of edge cases. So sometimes it might be very crisp and easy to read. Sometimes it's going to be so forced together and scaling is going to be off, then everything becomes blurry, hard to read. So real estate is one of those resources which you don't have an infinite amount, sorry, infinite amount of. Um, what else? As far as some of the visuals go, I'm going to take a closer look at the map visual. And there's one interesting feature that I want to cover, which is the node reach. Um, then field parameters, going to go through this. And yeah, let's go for the map. Let's go for that. So one of the things that I want to have in this report is, for example, a map. Because we have the location, and we have the longitude and latitude, which is something that is required for the map visual. So let's go ahead and add those latitude and longitude. So that's the initial chart. The yellow color might not be that ideal, so I'm just going to change it to something like gray. Good. Numbers. Remember, guys, whenever you're creating the report, make sure that it's readable. Like for example, right here, if the number is on the dark gray, you can see it. However, these ones are pretty much invisible, right? So one of the things that you can do is you can kind of force the size of the bubble to be different. That's one alternative. Like for example, I could say that minimum and maximum is 30, so there's enough space and room. I can also increase the max again to something like 50, just to kind of make sure that I'm able to read everything. But then I start to overlap, which might not be ideal or you don't want to have in your report. So what's the alternative? The alternative, of course, would be that instead of positioning everything inside of it, on the formatting options, you have an option right here, value label position, and set it outside. Now I can go back to the original 3010 dimensions. So even the smaller bubbles have a separate place for the labels and you're always able to see. So that's one thing that I did here. The second thing that I did here is I wanted to be able to play around with the node reach functionality. So essentially what node reach is it's a functionality that allows me to create a shape around the location and define the size of it. So the main use case for this would be, let's say I want to look at a particular location and see if in, let's say, a radius of 50 miles or kilometers, there's another location, right? Or 100 kilometers or whatever it is. So one of the things that you can do here is you can hard code those values, but usually what I love to do is give the opportunity for the user to play around with this, right? I could, like I said, hard code and say just showcase a radius of 50 miles, but then the user doesn't have any sort of flexibility when it comes to it. So what I want to do is I created the same way as you would create a what if parameter. You can go for a new parameter, numeric range, and I did minimum, I think I set it to 10 or something, increments of 1, maximum 200, default, I don't know, 50, right? This creates the slider. that the user can use afterwards. And in the data set, there's a new value, which I can then afterwards use in where it was node reach. Now, which parameter there is. You can see I'll have a lot of. This is the reason why you name the parameters and not keep parameter. So don't do what I did. Rename them properly. So here, radius size no, node reach. This is the one that I want. And for this one, I'm gonna adding this value. Cool. Doing switching the values, nothing changes, right? Okay, might be broken, but it's not. The node reach is a property that's only visible for singular nodes. Now, the reason for this is because right now we're looking at a cluster of locations, right? So there are different dots of different locations just being clustered as a group. If I would do the node reach based on individual locations, it would look very weird. The reason for it was because, for example, if I zoom in, you can see this splits up. So there's something here and there's something here. If I go back to a single dot, I can't really create a radius of 50 miles from a cluster because there's one location here and one here, right? So the way and how you can see it is either you disable clustering. So first I disable it, then I go to shape layers and I change one of them to be node reach. And now you can see, for example, if I increase this, this creates these areas around it. And what it does from a data perspective, if I have, let's say, I copy the same visual and convert it into a table, what it does is every single shape is a selector. So if I select a shape that has multiple locations within it, I can see which shapes are here, right? I can see what's happening here. And okay, there's only one single location of what's happening here. Again, not overlapping with anything. It might seem that it kind of partially covers this one, but remember, when it comes to data visualizations, the data point is a single pixel in the very middle of things. So essentially, if I would go here and say that the minimum and maximum is just a single pixel, that would be the best representation, but then this dot is right here and it's very small, right? So you play around with these values and just make sure that it's visible, noticeable, and distinguishable. So going back to 1030, for example, have the node reach. I have disabled the clustering, but at the same time, it just looks very weird, right? There's shapes everywhere, there's radiuses, and it becomes very messy. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna turn back the clustering. Okay, cool. But the problem with this is that if I, for example, reload the page, you can see right here, there's no node reaches. If I get closer enough at a certain point, they don't split because I need to define the node reach level, this max clustering zoom level. And how do you know which level you are on? You go to the toolbar, zoom number. You can see now a number right here. And this allows you to understand, okay, what level of zoom am I currently on and at which I want to split. So for example, if I set this to 8, I go down to level 8. I still have the clusters. This is inclusive. So it includes that last level. Now, if I go to level 9, you can see I split down into individual nodes. Because of the number that is in the node reach, I can lower it. But you can see this is where I see the split. If I go back to cluster, it disappears. Go down to a detail level, I can see how things are starting to overlap. So you can start to combine these things, right? I can have the node clustering just to have a neat and tidy look of the visual. If somebody wants to go down into details or look into a specific region, they can zoom into the map and uncover more details. That's what data visualization is all about, right? It can give you insights as an overview, but it also allows you to get down to the details. Okay, so that's something that definitely we can play around with. What else I would recommend is for the shape layers, you can see sometimes this is something that happens, right? The no reach kind of sticks there. So one thing that I would recommend is under the shape layer, also adjust the min zoom level to the same level as your clusters, or actually even higher. Yeah. So when you go down to this level, you can see the node reach, but if you go out of it, it automatically disables it. If you keep it at 0, this kind of creates a conflict that the visual is getting information. Okay, I'm on level 8, but based on the settings, I'm not supposed to split the nodes, but the node reach is supposed to be shown. So better to make everything done properly. So this is something you can play around with. What else? For the map visual, one other thing that you can do is have donut charts around the locations. And this is available when you have a cluster. So for example, if I go for something like, I don't know, let's say subscription model, I add this category, I go down to the node settings in the formatting options, scroll down, find pie charts and nodes, enable it, and it allows me to see this. Which again gives me another dimension that I can look into and understand. For example, okay, what's the split between different subscription models based on customer count? Right now, it's not based on customer count, it's based on the number of locations. So if I want to split it based on customer count, I need to add customer count to the value. And you can see it resized everything accordingly. And this again can be afterwards used as a cross filter. So for example, if I select a cluster, you can see that filters out the data. If I select a particular slice within the cluster, that filters out the data as well. So there's different ways on how you can cross filter the information. But what you have to be cautious about is the following. Once you have created a clustering node, once you have set the max clustering zoom level, we just saw this before, as soon as I get over a certain level, it expands and splits down basically, right? Shows you those individual locations. Now, every single one of those locations is going to be exactly the same for different types of memberships. So what's going to happen visually is if I go down to the point where I split it, you can see this is what happens. If you would have different locations based on different categories, then it would be fine. But since we have all the locations in a singular point, this is a little bit of a drawback, right? Because right now you just basically have a target. So covering this depends on how you want to tackle this. You can, of course, play around with the node reaches. You can say that there is max clustering zoom levels, whether you want to use it or not. Or you just want to, for example, be like, okay, I like this, but I much prefer that there's no additional bubble, not bubbles, but nodes. So I remove the category type and I disable the pie charts on nodes. Just keep it like this, right? Or if you want it, then just play around with the settings and make sure that it's usable and understandable from a user perspective. Because the last thing you want to do is create a visual which seems okay until you touch it. Once you zoom in, for example, everything explodes and there's just too much data and it's pretty much useless at that point. So one of the things that I would recommend is node reach. You can definitely use in this chart. It's useful when you go down to a detailed level just to see if there's an additional overlap. Whenever you do have these sliders, just make sure, like I said, to properly name them. So instead of just a random parameter, you not just tell me that this is the node reach, because I could, for example, just say that, okay, this is the radius from nodes, something like this, right? But you also allow me to understand right here, you can switch between kilometers and miles. What am I associating this with? So if I'm going for kilometers, just make sure that to mention this to me or to the user so they understand what they're essentially changing. Otherwise, if it's just an index, well, they're changing the index, but they don't know what it references to. Small little details. But yeah, this is definitely something that you can play around with. Because once you have it in a report, like you can have a timeline next to it, you can have a donut chart to play around with. Because one of the interesting things that you can do is it might seem counterintuitive or be like, okay, but I already have donut charts here, split exactly by the same principle based on the membership type in this case, membership type here, membership type here. So why would I use two of them? Quite simple. On a cluster basis, you are seeing the split on those particular clusters or areas that the information is being gathered from. Whereas a separate donut chart allows me to understand the overall situation, right? And if I just want to feel focus on a particular membership type, I can use this cross filter and just see one location type, not type, but membership type. If I want to compare one against the other, in total, this is how it looks like. This is how it looks on per location basis, right? So there's a lot of different ways in how you can cross interact with the charts with the available information. What else? Whenever you are using field parameters, this is one of the things that happens a lot of the time is whenever you are using, for example, let's say a value of parameter, let's say, which one are we using? Are we changing here? And this is this parameter. Okay. Yeah. Change the names of the parameters. Don't be like me. I was just too lazy with this. So if I add the value right here, you can see this is what happens. It's showing me first parameter and suddenly nothing's working. I could go with a different aggregation of count or something, but then again, it seems wrong, right? So what's the reason for this? The reason for this is because by default, when you add a value, sometimes it detects it as a textual value, and sometimes it allows you to transpose it as a numerical value. So in order to showcase it correctly, you need to make sure that this has been turned on. Show value of selected field. So once you select this, you can see the chart is being displayed. And the other option you can see here is show selected field. Once we do this, this is going to give us errors. This is going to give us the proper values to display. And then, of course, I can just start to play around with different field parameters, allowing me to have the same space, but for different values. The only thing to take into account, or not the only thing, but one of the main things to take into account whenever you are using field parameters for different variables. Now, what I mean by this, let's say if we're looking right here at the donut chart, right? I'm right now looking at total revenue. So that's one numerical aspect. And then I have it based on the category, whether it's membership type or subscription model. You can have these different variables and switches available to the user, but create them in a way where it makes sense and they understand what they're doing. Because you can theoretically just create different groups, different visuals for different switches and so forth. But if there's going to be a lot of different switches, it's very easy for the user to get lost and just not understand fully what's available, what they're looking into. So that's one thing just to take into account. Also, whenever you're talking about values, try to understand if it makes sense to have an option of selecting both or not. Like in my case, I don't want to see both of them simultaneously because it even wouldn't make sense, right? Think about it. Total revenue goes into hundreds of thousands, whereas customers go just into a few hundreds. The scale disproportion is completely ridiculous. So what you want to do is make sure that if it's not something that you want the user to do, adjust the properties of the visual, make sure that, for example, only a single selection is available. There's also not an option to deselect something, right? Those might seem like very small little things, but when it comes to new users and exploring the charts, they love to break stuff. And the more, let's say, ways on how to do it you give to them, the higher the chance that they're going to break something and come back to you and be like, it doesn't really work properly, where it's just not meant to be used this way. So if you have a way on how to limit this, use those. Change the chart, change the type of visuals, change the settings, whatever necessary to make it easy to use. What else? Different switches. Yeah, for the timeline as well. It allows us to kind of switch between different values. Now, one thing that I wanted to do here was membership type, subscription model. I think I haven't used the correct parameter. This, okay. Yeah, this one's going to go into the legend. So I want to be able to also basically do this, right? I want to focus whether on the subscription models or the membership types. And there's one thing that I did here purposely, and I want you to look at these variations also when you are creating your reports. So right here, if we're looking at the timeline visual, I haven't done anything with the legend. This is how the default legend is going to act like. So the default property for the legend is going to be a grid mode, and there's going to be position bottom left. What grid essentially means is think about as using a table. And with a table, once you have a value in a cell, it goes based on the longest cell, and then everything kind of fits into that. So that's the same principle right here. It goes with the longest possible variation that you have in the combinations, adds a little bit of extra space, and then the same size is used for everything. So for example, now if I switch to membership type, you can see that instead of just, because those are not very long texts, right? But because of the previous variation, the size of the box is defined and 4 boxes no longer fit there. So what you can do with the visuals is under legends, switch it to so-called inline mode. Inline mode is a dynamic mode that tries to understand, okay, how many characters I have in this variation and allocate the space a lot more efficiently. And the reason why this is going to be very important is because when you switch between them, you don't want the legends, for example, to suddenly be 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, and so forth, where suddenly you don't even have enough space to showcase some of them. So play around with what you have given to the user, right? If you have those field parameters, and if you are going to be using legends, make sure that you go through all of those options. See if everything fits nice and neatly. If not, readjust something, whether it's the size of the items itself. So for example, instead of going for, let's say right here, subscription model, early bird, annual, monthly, quarterly. If let's say the annual part is the problematic one, I go for early bird, monthly, quarterly, right? Adjust those names of the groups or the properties itself. And this is one of the things that what I would probably do from a dataset perspective. Sure, we have it in the original one, but early bird annual usually means some sort of a subscription that was given to those users who signed up, whether the gym was just opened or one, at the very beginning. But at the same time, if we look at the timeline, we can see that early bird discounts are even being applied if we're going down to month on every single month. If we go down to days, almost to the very last day, which seems kind of weird, right? You can't really have an early bird discount just rolling up. So what I would probably be doing, just to make it a little bit more understandable or something, would rename this. So instead of early bird annual, I would call it, I don't know, special promo or something like that. But that's just me. Because at the end of the day, remember, we gave you the base, right? What you do with the names of the columns, what you do with the categories, how you group them or anything is completely up to you. The same goes, for example, for if we're creating something like a facet of ages. So we use the age as a category. We go for a customer count. We've done this as well in other challenges. So instead of just looking at all of ages, in this case, it's even based on the value. Most likely, you want to sort it based on the age. So there's some sort of chronological order to things. Looking at this, fine. Alternative would be, for example, to create buckets. There's different ways on how you can do this. One of them is click on the age column, new group, use binning principle. Why is it cut off half? I don't know. But what I want to do is to list. No, I want to use bins, but instead of size of bins, I want to have number of bins. There are different methods. Either you define the size of the bucket or number of buckets, right? I want to go for a number of buckets. I want to have them in 5 equal classes. You can see the class is going to be 7.4 years. So you can adjust these numbers to kind of see, okay, this doesn't fit very nice. If there's something that allows me to kind of see, okay, there's always going to be some decimal ages. Yeah, because it's an odd number. Oh, size of the bin then. Every 5 years, create a group. It's going to create a new category or a new column. And then I can use that column essentially as the initial level. What this allows me to do is, okay, you can see these different groups. Click on a group, go down to a yearly split, right? Because the main idea about data visualization is not just to overcrowd or just to show information. The main idea about data visualization is to give you some insights, right? To give me something to work with and to decide how I want to investigate this further. So this is one of the options. The same for the timeline as well. By default, if you add the full hierarchy list, so if we're adding the date field based on, let's say, the join date, you can see it's the typical hierarchy, right? Year, quarter, month, day. If some of the levels are not necessary, let's say you start off with a yearly view, not a big fan of it. Instead of removing it from here, you can go into the formatting options, initial display unit. You can see by default it's top, set it to custom, and then enable month. What this is going to do when I come back to the report, by default, it's going to be opening up on monthly granularity. And then, of course, I still have the option of going back and forth into years, quarters, months, and so forth. But I just define the entry point. Allow the user to kind of play around with what's available, right? The main reason why this is very important, for example, having something like a different split option or different entry point, is especially for those cases where, let's say, I would only have 2 different years, right? Let's say, or even a single year. Let's say I just finished my first year, or I'm still working on my first year. So what I could do is, let's do it like this. I'm gonna enable the filters. Day since last visit, no. Or there's join date, filters on this page. It's gonna be relative date in this year. So if I have something like this, right? If I restart the view, if I have a monthly split, I have a little bit more information. If I would keep it on a yearly granularity, mwah, amazing chart, right? Just a chart that takes half of the page with just a massive column, which doesn't really give you a lot of ideas or insights. Sure, you can allow the user to get to this point, but the initial entry point would be a monthly split where you can actually see some sort of dynamic. So it's just playing around with different ideas to see, okay, what else I can do with this. Yeah, for the numbers, make sure you take into account different subscription models or types. I forget which ones it were. Let's take a look. Those were subscription models. So this is something that I did, right? I created separate measures for each of the units. For each of the units, I'm just basically creating it based on the calculation. If it's a monthly, I multiply it by 12. I go with a simple approach where I think that everything's going to happen perfectly, right? What you could do as well is we only have data up until June, but you still have a lot of memberships which haven't been canceled because everything that's in the system is still active, right? Unless somebody cancels it. So what you could also theoretically do is create a calculation which shows you projections. So based on calculate, you can say, hey, if the maximum month from available data is up to June, starting from June, create the same value by multiplying it based on what's available and create a separate configuration option for it. So kind of create a forecast. So different ways on how you can handle things. All right. I can see from the team that we have 2 questions. Let's go through them and then see how much time we have left. Maybe I can cover. In terms of performance, it might be better to create those buckets in Power Query. Yeah, everything that you do in Power Query is going to be handling data transformations a lot quicker and more efficiently rather than creating everything on the desktop side or basically once you have it loaded up in Power BI. So if you create the buckets not through a calculated column or not through grouping, but you actually do it through transformed data, it's going to be more efficient. Always, if you can do something on the back end, it's always better than doing it on the front end, basically. But if everything else fails, this is your first report, you have no idea how to do this in the Power Query, it's not the end of the world, right? Sure, it's better to learn how to do it in Power Query, but for now, as an intermediate solution, this is also fine. What else? When you're in Power Query, if we kind of expand on the previous one, remember I mentioned about the days per week. So for the days per week, for example, let's see. If I go for clear all the filters. So the total revenue right now is 579,000 and dot 10, right? So almost 580K. One of the things that I've seen a lot of people do, and this is not necessarily the greatest way because you do have to adjust all the calculations to showcase the numbers properly, but one way on how to handle the split would be like this. If you right click on a column, split column by delimiter, you can choose the option of splitting instead of columns to split it into rows. If I click OK, you can see it splits the entry basically into multiple duplicates of the same thing just by different days what I had the unique number. If you ever use a split by delimiter, make this a rule of thumb. Always do the following: right click, transform, and trim. For the love of God, please do this. The reason why this is so important is quite simple. If you have, for example, Saturday and Saturday with a space at the end or just a blank character, right? Those are two unique values. Trimming deletes the leading and spaces at the end. So it kind of at least tries to mitigate those cases so you have the same value. But why I wanted to do this. If I now close and apply this, look at this number. Boom, just like that, basically tripled my income, right? So what happened is because of the duplicates, I cannot just sum the values anymore. I have to adjust the calculations to still keep the relevant numbers. The best way on how to handle anything like this, just to make sure that, for example, the calculation is done correctly or anything like that, would be the same old table. So what I would do is go for indexes, since indexes are my unique identifiers for the subscription. I would go for final price, and then I would go for, which was my number, the total revenue. And I can see, okay, what else was taken into account was the subscription model, I think, monthly. So this times 12 should be this. Okay. What I'm going to also be adding is we split it based on the day. What was the name of the column? Days per week. The reason why I want to add this is because this is the unique separator we just did. So we can see that I have two entries, same subscription, but because there's two different days, it's being duplicated and the same two values are being summed up together. So I only need to take this number once rather than twice. So you would have to account for those scenarios. Okay, how do I do this? There are ways. So for example, just to kind of show you, this is one way on how it's being handled. I'm taking the total, dividing it by the number of unique entries, and getting back to that almost 580K. But this is just one of the variations. There are other ways on how you can handle this. Just main thing is make sure to check the numbers, right? So it makes sense. Please, can we go over days per week dimension? Um, don't necessarily want to do this because I want this to be part of the challenge. But yeah, one way on how you can handle this is what I just did. You can right click, split columns by delimiter, convert it into rows under advanced options, not columns, and keep the data set like this. It is possible to convert everything like this, but then the main thing is take into account all the transformations and also adjust all the calculations. Like I said, you cannot just use typical sum. You can see right here, the total revenue is just using essentially a combination of multiple of them. And since it's summing up, these numbers are basically lying to me. It's more noticeable when you go for, let's say, let's put it like this. Let's go for a matrix. Let's go for a matrix and multiple values. Another value that I'm adding here is not the sum, but the count of indexes. So this allows me to see, for example, which indexes were being reused most of the time. So index 2 has actually 5 entries. So based on the original approach, I would basically sum up 5 times 360, which is a completely incorrect value. This is what I expect from the membership. This is what the regular sum would give me. So be careful with those numbers. But the reason why this would be beneficial is, like I said, now I could create, for example, something like this. I could create a combo chart, which would be days per week based on customer count, sorted based on day number. Okay, so I would have to do some additional adjustments there, but it would allow me to understand, for example, which days of the week have the highest attendance. It looks like Wednesday. Add another layer. We had the average check-in time and checkout time. So adjusting those as well would allow me to understand, okay, days and which hours were being used the most. Let's just keep it as a check-in time, for example. It's not ideal because right now every unique combination is, a part of the visual, but it's one of the options. But yeah, I'd say just be very cautious about if you do any transformations. Validate the data that you have created. But other than that, that's going to be it from my side today. I hope it was interesting and useful. If not, tell us what you didn't like. Also, if you want us to do something else with the webinars where you're just missing something, Alexander, can you push the QR code for the feedback form if we have it this time? But if not, you can always just reach out, guys, to webinars@zoomcharts.com. And there you go. There's a feedback form. So in the feedback form, just tell us what you think about the webinars. If you like it, if you dislike it, if you think that something is missing, if we should change something, because the only way on how we can improve is if you tell us what we're doing wrong or good, or just let us know how we're doing. It's kind of hard to improve if you don't know what to improve. We might be focusing on something that you didn't even care about. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you in the top 5. So yeah, don't forget that we have the second webinar. So sign up for the top 5 announcement as well. And in the meantime, I'm wishing you good luck